We're good?
There we go.
We're good. Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and warm welcome to the Major Applications Planning Subcommittee High Speed 2. I'm Councillor Ian Edwards and I'm Chairman of this committee. Warm welcome to anybody who may be following us on YouTube. There being no members of the public present in the committee hearing, I will dispense with the usual pre-meeting announcements, other than to remind everybody to please have their mobile phones turned off, and we will get straight into the business, if we may, please. Which is apologies for absence.
No apologies, Chairman.
Thank you. Declarations of interest coming before this committee meeting. Minutes of the previous meeting, we have some. So we have the 9th of May 2019 and the 9th of October 2018. So the 9th of May 2019, agreed? Thank you. And 9th of October 2018? Thank you very much. Okay. Matters notified in advance are urgent. No, this is a published agenda. We will go straight into the major applications. Application, please, Mr. Fine.
Thank you, Councillor. So this is a Schedule 17 application for the arrangements of a route to be used by 24 or more large good vehicles to HS2 work sites. Now that needs a little bit of clarification. The submission from HS2 Limited doesn't actually point us in the direction of what element of the Act it's being submitted under, but it is in actual fact being submitted under Schedule 17, Section 6, subsection 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And that's important because the language used by HS2 Limited is that this is a lorry route approval. That's not entirely accurate. This is a submission to the local authority for conditions relating to road transportation. And under the Act, we're entitled to consider the arrangements of this route. And there are two triggers for considering the arrangements: the actual route between the sites, or to the work sites, and the second trigger is when there's more than 24 or more LGVs. And for the purposes of the Act, that's large good vehicles, because you'll also see in the HS2 submission LGV referred to as light good vehicles. We obviously also have HGVs, heavy good vehicles. So for the purpose of this, we talk about large good vehicles, but for avoidance of doubt, we're referring to heavy good vehicles of 7.5 tonnes, not to be confused with light good vehicles. So that's what this submission is for. It's for the arrangements on the route to a work site for HS2 purposes of more than 24 or more lorry movements, and that's important. It's not a lorry route approval as such. And if we just look at the work sites in question, there's actually two work sites, but because they're using the same route, they've come to us for the arrangements on that route between two work sites. Two work sites, one off Harville Road, just south of the Dogs Trust, just south of Jews Lane, the access to the Hillingdon Outdoor Activity Centre, and one just in our borough at Moorhall Road, and the work site, the lorry route is up Harville Road, left at the Moorhall Road roundabout, and then into the site from that access. So these two sites in a bit more detail. Worksite 2 is the one at Moorhall Road. Worksite 1 is the one at Harville Road, just to the west of Harville Road. What is not up for a material consideration tonight is actually what is happening at these sites. Now there is some controversy around the activity at these. These are test piles for the viaduct foundations. So these are test piling in sensitive public water supply areas. So there is some controversy, and some of this has been made aware through this planning consultation. However, that is not a material consideration for this committee tonight. We are only considering the arrangements of 24 or more lorry route movements along a particular route. And this is the Moorhall Road one. As you can see, the Harville Road site here, there's already a compound in operation for HS2, and this is part of Cadent Gasworks and other various activity that HS2 are currently on board with. There's now, including that one, there's a work site west of Harville Road. There's one just north of that to the west of Harbour Road, and then there's 2 further compounds to the east of Harbour Road. So there's now 4 compounds in fairly close proximity. Slightly more controversial site. There's no existing compound at Moorhall Road, which will require the clearance of the trees. But again, not an issue for this submission tonight. So that's the general details. You'll see from the committee report that the local authority, that the officers have got some concerns with the arrangements in place. They relate to 3 different matters. So first is the safe movement and access from these sites. And the submission included 2 separate statements, the first from end of 2018, another one in February 2019. The concern is right turns out of these accesses, out of these work sites. These roads range from 40 to 60 mile an hour, and heavy goods vehicles, careful my terminology, heavy goods vehicles turning right out of these compounds, certainly onto these semi-rural networks, is a dangerous operation. This is actually reflected in the submission. So we've requested that there be no right-hand turns out of these work sites, so it's left in, left out. So a vehicle would turn left onto the Harbour Road work site and left out, and then go along past the Moorhall Road one back onto the major network in Bucks County Council area. So that's the first area of concern. The solution for that concern was to impose a condition requesting left in, left out only. HS2, I'll come on to HS2 Limited's response in due course. The second area of concern was peak flow. Now, as I'm sure you're well aware, these roads are don't exactly have spare capacity for extra vehicles at the minute. So we've maintained our stance with HS2 Limited all along that any movements on these roads has to be predominantly off-peak and limited on-peak where absolutely necessary. For avoidance of doubt, peak time being 8 till 10 in the morning and 4 till 6 in the evening. And again, we've proposed a condition restricting activity and vehicle movements along this route in peak hours. The third issue was monitoring, and this was a matter that was raised by this committee at the last lorry route approval hearing, using the wrong language again, sorry, road conditions approval, and it was a fair assessment from the committee that the monitoring hasn't exactly been in place to date, and we haven't been able to give the confidence that we have proper monitoring from HS2 Limited. So again, in this instance, without proper monitoring in place, we've requested a condition. As I'm sure this committee is well aware by now, if we impose conditions on these submissions, they have to be agreed by HS2 Limited. And in response to the 3 conditions, we have the following. The first, in relation to the safe operation of the highway, HS2 Limited responded that the council has not provided any evidence to justify control over the direction of turn from worksite 1 off Harbour Road or worksite 2 Moorhall Road for all LGVs, large good vehicles, at all times. However, this position that they reached through the discussions on the conditions is fairly contradictory to their own submission. So their own submission states the lorry access into the work sites 1 and 2 is at a point where the road speed is 50 miles per hour and 40 miles per hour, albeit in proximity to a speed limit of 60 miles per hour and only recently reduced from 60 to 40. Due to the short duration of the peak intensity of movements, it is preferential to utilise a left-in, left-out solution rather than to operate two-way in and out solution at the worksite entrance. This will reduce delays to other road users and is a safer means of operating the worksite access. A site traffic marshal will be present at the worksite entrance to ensure vehicles associated with test piling at both worksites, egress and access, will be done so in a correct manner. So their own submission acknowledges the concerns of right-hand turning heavy good vehicles onto these roads. So we requested a condition, officers requested a condition that there should be no right-hand turns. HS2 Limited were broadly in agreement with it, albeit that they required some right-hand turn movements on the Harbour Road work site during off-peak hours only to access between two sites. And in general, that was broadly accepted by officers, but we haven't actually confirmed a final condition to that respect, and we'll come on to where that takes us in a minute. In relation to condition 2, peak flows, again, their position is a little unclear. They've stated in correspondence with the officers, while we accept that the number of vehicles could in principle relate to grounds in paragraph 6 of 5 of the Act, and accordingly we acknowledge that a condition could be imposed to prevent prejudicial effects on road safety or the free flow of traffic, which is good. The Council has provided no evidence as to why it is necessary and reasonable to restrict the number of vehicles using the route to the numbers indicated. So HS2 Limited are basically challenging us to why we want restrictions during the peak hours, which is, again, slightly odd because their own submission states consideration was given to limiting the movement to off-peak only. The reason why they would consider off-peak only is for obvious reasons. Peak level traffic in these areas is well documented and considered to be generally at capacity, these roads. So they did not accept the condition imposing restrictions on peak level of traffic. So we haven't reached any solution on that one. Position on condition 3 and on monitoring, as set out in the report. It's fair to say that since HS2 have been active in this area, there's not been a free flow of information on traffic movements. The process for collation and dissemination of information remains unclear, and it is noticeable in their submission that they have not pointed to a specific protocol of monitoring, reporting, and ensuring that they will do what they say they will do. In fact, the only part of the submission that they point to is the local traffic management plan, which has recently been updated, and the only section on monitoring, I'll read it out because it's not long. All vehicles accessing the site will be required to be booked in prior to arriving on site. During the test pile works, this will be undertaken with a paper-based recording system. However, for the main works, it is proposed to utilise an electronic booking system. And that is the extent of their submission on monitoring. So there's no submission to local authority, there's no timing of reporting, and there's no questions as to what happens if they don't do what they say they will do. So again, the response on condition 3 was not satisfactory to officers. As a consequence, we didn't agree a final position on this application, and HS2 Limited are entitled under the Act to basically appeal non-determination, which is what they've done. So the appeal has now been submitted and is lodged with Planning Inspectorate PINs and will be heard by written representations, that's the correct phrase. So we're seeking resolution from this committee. And the resolution is set out in the report. We say on condition 1 and safe access and movements from these sites, we believe we can reach a sensible position with HS2 Limited. However, in relation to conditions 2 and 3, condition 2 relating to peak level movement traffic, they have not accepted, and we don't believe that we can maintain the free flow of traffic without that condition. In relation to condition 3, without monitoring, we don't see that there's much point in putting controls in relation to condition 2. So condition 2 and 3 basically read in collaboration. And without those two conditions, we can't accept that there would be a free flow of traffic, and the recommendation from the officers then is without those conditions, the application should be refused. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian. A very full briefing there, and particularly helpful that you clarified that this isn't a straightforward route approval, that this is about wider arrangements for transportation. Colleagues, this is a straightforward matter for us to consider, and that is whether we believe that officers are correct in their assessment that without these controls being placed on them, the adverse impact on our residents and businesses within this borough and people moving through this borough will be too adversely impacted by the construction movements. It's whether or not you believe that. Councillor Oswald.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Just a couple of things. The first one is I thought this map was pretty poor, actually. I couldn't read it very well at all. All I could make out was M25 and the A40, and I had to sort of go from there. I know the area anyway, but I thought that was pretty poor. But anyway, that's just a minor thing. But we laid out our concerns right from the outset, and it's being proved now that we're probably correct. I know that we are, because we all know the area. We know what it's going to be like. We know that it's busy. And as far as this report's concerned and HS2 is concerned, this is going to disrupt and prejudice the traffic movements. Part of that's in the report anyway. The traffic movements that go on every day in this area, and it's every day. And I think that the condition that we imposed in the outset, avoiding peak times for traffic movements, was right and correct. And I think that we all said this right from the outset, what this was going to be like, what an effect this was going to have. I think this is a good report, Chairman. And I certainly agree with the conditions that we've put in the report, and I think that we could agree those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, it's my understanding that there are a number of companies involved in this, that although it's referred to as HS2, as if that's one company, that in fact there are a number of contractors on site, number of operators. And I think, it's fair to assume that probably there's a bit of inconsistency amongst some of those, that, they will be operating, to what they feel is acceptable. I think right at the start, all the projections about traffic movement were just that, projections, because we didn't know. And I fail to understand why they would not want this to be properly monitored and known. I mean, already I'm sure people in the north of the borough will know more than I, but I've heard from people who live in that area about some of the lorry speeds, quite large vehicles travelling at, some hair-raising speed. And so the left-turning movement seems to me to be, eminently sensible and safe. And their own admission of that probably shows that they know that some of their contractors are driving in a way that they want to control. The very fact that they object or they're not accepting that this is an area that should be known and known publicly and controlled raises concerns in itself, certainly for me. And so I'm very grateful to officers for this report and the presentation which spells it out very clearly. And I think those of us who drive around the borough and know those roads and, some of the people living in those areas, we're hearing first-hand accounts of things that are happening. So it's very welcome, and I support this completely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Avery.
Yeah, I'm too very grateful for the detail in the report and the explanations we have been given, which to my mind clearly make out the case for the Office of View, that the requested conditions are necessary in terms of understanding the one in terms of highway safety, in terms of the no right turning condition 1, but also actually understanding the volume of these movements to avoid the impact on peak hour traffic, which we know is significant already in these parts. And clearly, if you are going to have condition 2, you then clearly do need to understand how that's going to be monitored to make sure it actually happens. I fully understand those two do tie together. But to my mind, the case is clear that we should have that information and that we should be attempting to control what goes on in peak hours. Otherwise, the impact on our residents does become severe. So I would have no hesitation in supporting the officer report.
Thank you. Any other comments? In the absence of that, it sounds as though there is agreement here that without these controls, we fear the adverse impact on the free flow of traffic and road safety. In the absence of the agreement of High Speed 2, can I just, if I may just finish, in the absence of High Speed 2's agreement to these conditions, I believe our only way forward is refusal. I'm bringing the borough solicitor.
I'm very sorry. I just want to ensure that if this application is going to be refused by the committee this evening, and certainly the indications from members are that it will be. I just want to ensure that we refuse it on the correct legal footing, because if we don't, we already have an appeal from High Speed 2 Limited on non-determination, and the planning inspector is going to take into account our reasons for refusing this particular application. So I think we need to, if I may, just sort of quickly go over the legal basis for refusal. Now, one of the common themes with these applications from High Speed 2 Limited is that there is a paucity of information which they submit in support of their application, which is concerning. And their response to that is that the environmental minimum requirements fully address the position. And these are a whole wide-ranging set of requirements which are not easily located. They appear in different documents, and they expect the local authority to know each one of them chapter and verse, and they place very heavy reliance upon them. But I still think that it must be right that in local authority decision making, it is established law that members, when they make decisions, must have enough information in front of them in order to make what's called a Wednesbury reasonable decision. But we cannot, in my view, refuse this application on that basis alone. We have to look at the wording of Schedule 17, because we are only permitted to refuse this application if the statutory wording in Schedule 17 is satisfied. I have included it in my legal comments, but I do think it's important that I do quickly run through those again, just for the avoidance of doubt, and so that it can be written into the final decision, the minuted decision. So with your approval, Chairman, I'd just like to quickly go through those. So Schedule 17, paragraph 6, it says that the relevant planning authority may only refuse to approve arrangements for the purposes of this paragraph on one of three grounds. Firstly, the arrangements ought to be modified to preserve the local environment or local amenity, to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic in the local area. And that is the relevant paragraph with which we are concerned this evening. And the final one, just for the sake of completeness, is to preserve a site of archaeological or historic interest or nature conservation value. That doesn't apply to this particular application. And as I've said already, this report highlights the fact that High Speed 2 Limited have not provided sufficient information in support of their application. So the reasoning which I've set out in the legal comments is that the Council is entitled, in accordance with Schedule 17, paragraph 6, to properly take into account the absence of this information and thereby refuse High Speed 2 Limited's application on the basis that the arrangements ought to be modified to prevent or reduce prejudicial effects on road safety or on the free flow of traffic in the local area, and are reasonably capable of being so modified. So the thinking there is quite clear, that if they had provided us with sufficient information, we could have taken a proper and considered view. By them failing to do so, it is my view that we can properly come to the view that the arrangements ought to be modified and indeed are capable of being so modified, and on that basis alone we have a legitimate reason for refusing this application. It's absolutely important, imperative in fact, that if there is to be a refusal, it is based on that particular ground, on that particular statutory ground, because there is no allowance to refuse it on any other basis. We cannot simply refuse it because of the common law Wednesbury reasonable point, and members may be aware that, you know, there is a judicial review at the moment on another application which I ought not to talk further about because it is before the courts. And as Ian has said, you know, we now have an appeal which will be determined in writing by PINS, but PINS will properly take into account the decision made this evening and the reasons for it, and that's why I felt it was incumbent upon me to sort of set out the legal parameters and the legal reasons for refusal, which I hope has been of assistance.
Thank you. It has. Councillor Oswald, there, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. I think with those comments from Rajala, I think that we can quite safely refuse this, and I'll move that, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duncan?
I'll second it. I was going to move it.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Moved and seconded. Show of hands, please, support of that and refusal. That is unanimously agreed that the application is refused. Thank you, and that brings this meeting to a close. Thank you very much.